very interesting that some of the settlers took up for the FLN to help perpetuate the liberation process, which is pretty cool, you know, and they were able to get past things, and then so they looked at both views. Some of them were assholes and some of them, you know. Appendix 1. I might as well go to 13 because that's the first thing it wants me to read. Let's see how far we can get on this tonight. All right, let's go ahead and start. Sorry about the echo if there's still echoing. All right, internet fine. Everything looks good. No lag. No lag. Everything's okay. I'm guessing. From the comments, any lag? Anybody can answer? No lag. Okay, thank you. It's okay. All right, Appendix 1. Algerian European minority. The personal experience on which I am reporting an Algerian European's awakening to the consciousness of his Algerian nationality is in no way exceptional. Others have had it before me. It seems to me oh, wait. I'm supposed to read one. Let me read one. Sorry, everybody. This appendix consists of a testimony of Charles Goromini, former intern at Saint Anne Psychiatric Hospital in Paris. Okay, cool. Let's go. All right, let's try this. The personal experience on which I am reporting an Algerian European's awakening to the consciousness of his Algerian nationality is in no way exceptional. Others have had it before me. It seems to me worthwhile, however, to show how European students without any past experience of political activity, having simply leftist learnings to begin with, have finally chosen in this war to be Algerians. Very few, to be sure, have carried their ideas through completely and joined the FLN. This must not be held against them. I know from experience how heartrending this radical attitude can be. I should like simply to emphasize the fact too often overlooked in the course of the revolution. Europeans of Algeria have become conscious of belonging to the Algerian nation. While they are not a majority, they are nevertheless more numerous than is generally believed in Algeria or in the world. They cannot express themselves. It is in part in their name that I am speaking here. When I broke out on November 1st, 1954, the Algerian Revolution was suddenly to reveal our ambivalence. We had pronounced ourselves in favor of the right of the Vietnamese people and the Tanzanian people, the Tunisian people, to their independence. These positions were purely theoretical. However, as a total absence of political life in our community afforded no opportunity for concrete attitudes. As for the rights of the Algerian people, the question did not even arise, and we took refuge by comfortably and magically denying the problem. The segregation of political life into two colleges encouraged us in this. In the second college, the Algerian problems. In the first college, the French problem. So we would discuss and take positions on the CED and on the roles of the French Communist Party in Parliament. Number 14, the CED is the European Defense Community. Okay, good. Even the colonial problems were approached from a French point of view. This absence of curiosity with regard to our country burning problems had its origins, it must be recognized, in an unconscious race prejudice we all bore within us, have been inoculated by 20 years of colonial life. Being on the left, we had to be sure surmounted the aggressive colonialist racism. But we had by no means rid ourselves of the patriotism, not the least of the shocks that we experienced was the realization that we were still racist in attitude. From the very beginning, the colonialists would attack us, would ask us point blank to choose to be for or against the Felayan, Fellagha, to be for France or anti-France. All right, let's go down to 15 now. 15 is Algerian partisans. That's what the one I just spelled out, that's what it means, partisans. In the beginning, we still were bewitched, refusing to take a position on the problem. We took refuge in protests against the brutalities of the repression. The Committee of Students for the Defense of Civil Liberties had been set up. I decided to become a member. It was in this committee that I was able for the first time to have a political discussion with Algerians. Up to that time, I had never had such conversations, even with the best Muslim friends. A tactic agreement. A tactic. Tacit. Thank you. A tacit agreement seems to have been concluded. We recognize the validity of nationalist sentiments among the Muslim friends. But we never spoke of this so as not to break those bonds of friendship whose fragility we sensed. In this students' committee, relations between Muslims and ourselves were initially rather ambivalent. They wanted to give a political dimension to the committee's activity, while we felt it should remain on the humanitarian level. After we had passed a few motions condemning the repression, a concrete gesture was proposed to us. A student arrested in Paris had been transferred to, oh my gosh, Tizo Owezo, I can't say it. He had a clean record. It was decided that the delegation would go and bring him a parcel and deliver a letter of protest to the Attorney General. I volunteered. As the rule was to have equal representation of both national groups and delegations, including 3 Muslims and 3 Europeans, 2 Jewish peoples, and myself. In the course of the trip, the conversation brought out many ideas shared by our Muslim comrades and ourselves. A common love of country, the same aspirations to transform it, to enrich it, the same desires to see it freed from all race prejudice and any trace of colonialism. But we diverged on the question of the rebellion. For my part, I considered it understandable, like an excuse made possible by the excuses of colonialism. But I refused to accept the validity of violence. My Muslim comrades did not agree on this point, and we had a long discussion on the subject. They entirely approved of the profession of faith, patriotic, lyrical, and passionate, that, I don't know what they say, that T blank blank of Jewish people delivered to us in the course of a meal. I was greatly shaken by this profession of faith. I was undoubtedly what I needed to be moved to think about my relationship to the Algerian nation. I still had too much unconscious anti-Arab feelings in me to be convinced by a Muslim Arab person. It took the speech by that Algerian Jewish person to shake me. At Tizo Ouzou, we were barely allowed to get a glimpse of our comrade's lawyer. We were next called by the police. We were questioned separately. At one point, we saw a Muslim comrade coming out of the office, very pale, supported by 2 police officers. We first thought he had been maltreated, but this was not the case. He had simply been threatened with reprisals to his family because of his brother in the Maquis, who was being sought by the police. His name was Ben Hadia. His brother was Larde Ben Mahadia, in command of the Wilaye VA, a member of the CCE, since then arrested and murdered by the French troops. All right, let's go down to 16. That one, the WILAYA, a military region. The Arab word for Providence. CCE is Committee of Coordination and Execution. This was the body lettered, succeeded by the FLN that launched the insurrection. All right, back up to 16. I was the last to be questioned. The officers proceed to lecture me, quote, "You are the only Frenchman in the gang," end quote. I broke in to remind him of the official position as formulated by the government. Quote, "The Algeria is France and Algerians are Frenchmen." "You are from France, of course." "No, I was born in Algiers." "Ah, so you don't know the real Arabs who live in the villages." "I have lived for 8 years in Orleansville." "Listen, you're young. You've let yourself be carried away. You'll understand later." End quotes. We were released only at about 8 o'clock at night, after having been put through a criminal anthropometric department. To protest against this violation of rights, our student committee organized a public demonstration in a small hall. 300 students, nearly all Europeans, met under the chairmanship of 2 university professors. A resolution was passed condemning the excesses of the repression, demanding the restoration of democratic rights. A few days later, with H, it has 3 blanks, I represented our committee at a meeting which was to organize a big protest gathering. For the first time, I was put in contact with Muslim political leaders. These were the MTLD town councilors. I was struck by their conscientiousness and their moderation. At the first meeting, discussions took place regarding the date of May 8th, chosen by the meeting. All right, let's go down to 17. May 8th, 1945, the date of the Kabylian uprising in around Sief and Gulma. Can't say the name. Sorry, everybody. I'm horrible with names. Where was I at? Where was that number at? There it is, 17, right? Yeah, 17. Sweet. Although chosen solely for practical reasons, certain Europeans on the organizing committee felt that the choice of this university might look like a deliberate provocation.
Anniversary.
Huh? What?
You said university? Anniversary.
Thank you. The MTLD councilors agreed to a change of date by H, vehemently protested. But H vehemently protested. They had not asked that the meeting be held on May 8th, but since some seemed to consider this anniversary as having a certain importance, he attached to it an even greater importance. May 8th is a day of mourning for us. We shall be telling the colonialists that we have not forgotten, that we shall never forget, quote unquote. These words somewhat shocked the Europeans, and there was a certain uneasiness. The Europeans refused once again to look political reality in the face, and wanted to remain strictly within the limits of Republican legality. Legality, yes. In the end, the meeting was prohibited. Then, with the third quarter, came preparations for examination, and the defense of democratic liberties was put on the back shelf. I continued to have discussions with my Muslim friends. Little by little, I was beginning to understand the meaning of an armed struggle and its necessity, but I expressed doubts to the value of the armed action that was being carried on. Having no other source of information than the local press, we were subjected daily to the colonialist propaganda that made the Felayan out to be extremists and highway bandits. We partly accepted these views, but it could not be gainsaid that the horrors of the repression fully counterbalance the horrors of the Maquisards. Between the two, we were looking for a third way out. I thought at the time that this was possible and that a liberal opinion was to be found in Algeria, capable of joining forces with French liberal opinions and of opposing the solution based on the recognition of the right of the people to make their own choices. My discussions with members of my own family, and with my friends became less and less frequent and were increasingly discouraging. Race prejudice had crystallized under the pressure of events, and it was impossible to get people to think dispassionately, to have an intellectual approach to the problem. A string of insults would quickly take the place of arguments. Quote, traitor, SOB, pro-Arab communist, anti-French, end quote. And especially the supreme insult. I'm not saying that. I have never seen a man so hated as Madi's France except so it's still out. I don't know if I should say that. I have no idea.
Word.
Huh? Hello, Gray. MEDIE.
Don't say that word.
All right. Should I spell it? Can you spell it out? Maybe? I don't know. And a notorious Jewish person who betrayed France by waiting to give Algeria to the Arabs. But beneath this racialist outburst, it was easy to discern a deep anxiety, the fear of being run out of the country. Quote, what will become of us? Was a question that often recurred when day-to-day events were discussed. Paralyzed by their anxiety, these Europeans could imagine no other solution than the perpetuation of the status quo. That what Algerian Frenchmen were most worried about, in fact, was whether or not they would be able to remain in Algeria, having to leave whether from France, Canada, or Brazil, as so were contemplating, meant exile. I was able to calm people only by admitting that I shared their fears and that it was precisely in order to remain in Algeria that I was in favor of negotiation. Quote, let us frankly recognize, end quote, I said, quote, that Algeria is not France. Let us admit it openly, since we all think it. We will all grant that there have been political mistakes and social abuses in Algeria. Let us face it, and let us discuss the future with the Algerians, end quote. I would be listening to with a pity bestowed on one who has lost his. Yeah. The idea that one could come to terms with Arabs. After endless discussions and mountains of reading, I began to see things more clearly. To fight for the humanization of the repression was futile. It was necessary to fight in order to impose a political solution. But what solution? It soon became clear to me that even the embryo of social revolution was to be created in Algeria. The colonial links with France would have to be broken. Algiers' very survival requires that she promote the needed revolution, and this revolution could be accomplished only through independence. I had in this way come around to the ideals of the fella GHA. I can't say the word. Love of country, the passionate determination to live here, on the one hand, and on the other, my revolutionary ideas, or more simply, my leftist leaning drove me towards the same goal as the Muslim nationalists. Yet, I was too conscious of the different roads by which we had reached the same aspiration. Independence, yes, I agreed, wholeheartedly. But what independence? Were we going to fight to build a theocratic feudal Muslim state that frowned on foreigners? Who could claim that we had a place in such a Algeria? This was in July 1955, and until that day, I had never read a single track emanating from whom, indeed. People talked about the FLN, about the MAI, the MNA, and the MNA is the Movement Nationalisé Algérien, the middle of the road nationalist movement, whose leader was Massilia Hajj, which refused to join forces with the FLN. Oh, why not? The leaders of the former MTLD had been realized after being arrested in November because it was felt they were non-participants who was at the head of the revolution. Apart from independence, what were the objectives of the revolution? Was the theocratic and reformist a democratic state that they were planning? T told me that this was certainly important, but that in the last analysis, it was up to the Algerian people themselves to decide that one must be with the people, that this was the only way to transform the national revolution into a social revolution. T, I remember, a member of the Algerian Communist Party, was sorry that his ideas were not shared by the party, which was adopting the deplorable waiting policy. I saw a great deal of T in the course of the summer of 1955, and we quickly agreed to work among the students. It appeared important to us to try to rally students' liberal opinions at the reopening of the fall session, and to launch a campaign of information to open the minds of the students to the idea of independence and of our interrogation into the Algerian nation. It was at this time that the first tracts issued by the front. I had previously been told that of the democratic character it had required after the LD had split from it. I must admit that these tracts were a relief to me. The future democratic and social state that they advocate was a cause for which it was possible to fight. The events in Filipinaville of August 20th then broke out. I attached a good deal of importance to them, and I firmly condemned them. Condemned them.
Oh,
right?
it's condemned them.
Yeah, condemned them. But they did not shake my determination to help the revolution. The disillusion of the Algerian Communist Party, the ever greater restrictions of civil liberties, the growing irritation of the Europeans, the rise of fascism that we could observe among our student comrades, confirmed us in our ideas. It was necessary to create a solid leftist force in the universities, which would be capable of resisting the fascist upsurge, to bring out the information bulletin, which would open the eyes of the European students to begin with and have an impact on at least a part of the community. Who's in the comments? I don't know who that is. And ambitious.
Gray is here.
Huh? I didn't hear you.
Gray is here.
My what's here?
I said Gray is here. Say hi to Gray.
I did. I said hi to Gray. Hi, Gray. I'll say it again. Ambitious though, this program was not misdirected, as was shown by the importance that the fascist students assumed on February 6th and May 13th. Unfortunately, we were unable to carry it through. Damn. Within the framework of this plan, we made contact with the various students' factions. T asked me if I would agree to meet some nationalist students of the FLN tendency. I was, of course, willing. And one day we met a medical student, Khene, at the El Qatar Hospital. Qatar Hospital. The meeting was very cordial.
Number 20.
Okay. Lamine Kain, since then Secretary of State of the Provisional Government of the Algerian Republic. Mandizo, a liberal Catholic professor, detested by the settlers. Okay, good. Where was I at? Now I lost it. There it is. Found it. The meeting was very cordial. Kain was skeptical as to the results, but he was willing to participate in the first meeting. I next made contact with students who had formed an association under the convenient label of Progressive and Mendozist. C, one of the outstanding members, showed no enthusiasm and refused on various pretexts to participate. T and I quickly got the impression that C had something better to do than to play with students. After two or three meetings, nothing came of our group except a few motions that we were unable either to distribute or to have printed in the newspaper. The hope of launching a bulletin and of broadcasting our ideas among the students quickly evaporated. It was then decided to amend our plans. We set up a study group that was to deal with certain economic questions. Wanting to be Algerians, we felt it was obviously the duty of all of us either to betake ourselves to the Maquis or else seriously to prepare ourselves to become the country's future leaders in the professional and technical fields. Our qualifications as fighters were more than dubious, and as we were not heroes, wisdom easily prevailed. But we were ready to help the front if it were to call upon us. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Algeria was becoming increasingly charged. Morocco's accession of independence and the dissolution of the National Assembly gave rise to an agitation that kept mounting until the outbreak of February 6. Let's find out what happened in February 6. February 6, 1956, departure of the Saucetel from Algiers, the arrival of Guy Mullet, then the new French Prime Minister, which set off the first major settler demonstrations, in the course of which the premier was pelted with tomatoes and other objects and frightened into abandoning the moderate policy that he had come to initiate. Nice. Was that 22? Okay, let's go find 22. There it is. We became more and more known, and we were sometimes insulted in the streets by people we did not know. On the other hand, liberal students increasingly came to ask us to explain things, wanting to be told about the revolution, concerned over the future of the country, to have contact with Muslim students. With the letter and with the UGEMA. All right, let's go down. We had frank and open relations devoid of any misunderstanding. Now we're going to 23. The UGEMA, Union Generale D, it's probably students in French, and Muslim Algerians probably in French. And the other one will be a progressive student organization with nationwide membership in France. Okay. Now I have to find it. It was on 22 or 23. Okay. They considered us Algerians. Common activities, even minor ones, mimeographing and distributing together the tracks of the UGEMA, assuring order lines during the conferences, made us more rapidly accepted. But the wall of distrust was sometimes slow to vanish. On the occasion the elections to the Students' General Assembly, our small group was able to draw up so-called liberal lists in nearly all the schools to oppose the fascist list, aided by the blundering racism in our adversaries and by the effective works among the Jewish minority. In effect, an effective wave of anti-racist development. For the first time in its history, the elected General Assembly was a left-wing one, ready to follow the recommendations of the UNEF. And we're going down against torturers, and violations of illegality. Here we go. 25 is Ben Yahya, the president of the General Union of Algerian Students, who later became a member of the National Council of the Algerian Revolution. Ben Baiouchi, commander of the Army of National Liberation, who was later unalived in battle. All right. Okay. This quickly became clear when 3 students were arrested with Ben Yahi and Ben Bayouchi. I can't say it. We drafted a motion demanding that the legal time limited in incarceration in police headquarters be respected and warned against physical maltreatment. This motion, oh wait, do we have 25? No, I already read 25. This motion, unanimously adopted, created a certain stir among the students. But the results of the election to the French National Assembly soon came and swept other concerns into the background. How close we then seemed to our goal. The triumph of the left in France justified all our hopes. Anxious students kept coming to us in increasing number. Quote, what is going to become of us when negotiations begin and Algeria perhaps requires her independence? Will we still be able to remain? And it then occurred to us to organize meetings of Muslim students and European students. 2 or 3 such meetings took place where everyone spoke freely. The Europeans' worries were expressed mainly in aggressive terms. Respect for the rights of the minority, respect for culture, for religion. On every point, the Muslims gave their reply. And as in a psychodrama, the aggressiveness would disappear with the anxiety. I was able to observe that was easing of tensions occurring when the Muslims declare, quote, you are Algerians, just as we are. But if you want to leave the country, you're free to do so. And the Europeans would always answer, we don't want to leave. We don't want to be strangers in this country. On such a basis, fruitful discussions could take place. Meanwhile, February 6th was approaching. The atmosphere had become nervous, tense, irritating. We received threatening letters and insulting telephone calls. The fascists made their first attempt on the deputy, Herenu. Then it was Camus' turn. We had gone to his lecture to hear one of our elders, and if need be, protect him from the fascists. On this point, we were not called on to intervene. Camus' audience had been carefully screened, and the approaches to the hall were guarded by the helmets CRS. We expected that Camus would take a clear position on the Algerian problem. What we were treated to was a sweet, sinister speech. He explained to us in length that the innocent civilian population must be protected, but he was categorically against fundraising in favor of innocent families and political prisoners. We in the hall were dumbfounded. Outside, the mob of fascists was rhythmically yelling Algerian Franceses and screaming, Camus to the gallows. But these demonstrations seemed to us to be the dying spasm of the colonialist beast. Even the monster demonstration on the occasions of, oh my gosh, so Estilas departments were Professor Bonquin's hysterical appeals and their repercussion among the students did not faze us. We had the immense hope in the new French government, invested by the entire assembly, to make the peace. Not for a moment did we doubt that this government would put an end to fascism in Algeria. What Edgar Failure and his majority of the center have done to Morocco, Guy Mollet and his left-wing majority would surely do more easily in Algiers. When I say, quote, we, I am not only speaking of the Europeans. I am also thinking of the Muslims who thought we, as we did, that the end was near, and who were asking us to work together in the imminent peace as we had done in the war. Then came February 6th. For 2 days, the whole city had been a seething cauldron of excitement. Columns paraded through the streets, waving their tricolor and singing the Mera Silesia, shouting, Algeria, Francicia. It's all in French, sorry. Cars wove back and forth, tossing out tracks, honking without letting up. Such was the atmosphere in which Guy Mollet was received. I was not present at the scene of the monument honoring the dead, but my comrades told me about it. Not for a moment had we thought that this welcome could make Guy Mollet come to the grave decision that followed. We thought, on the contrary, that irritated by Algerian Europeans, we would have fewer scruples, a less unease conscience about opposing the negotiated solution that we were all looking forward to. And so we were stupefied to learn at the end of the afternoon of General Catruck's resignation. It was Ben Bat-Ouch who announced it to us. He was overwhelmed. I saw Cayenne next to me, turning pale and clench his fists with fury. All around us, people were embracing amid great bursts of laughter, singing the Marseillaise. The city suddenly took on an appearance of a vast fair. It was nauseated by so much unintelligence. As we separated, one of us said, quote, "And now we have no one left but the FLN to speak for us." It quickly became obvious to us that with France reluctant to make the fascist minority and Algerian toe the mark, it was henceforth up to the FLN to do so. After February 6th, we could no longer turn our eyes towards France. Not from her would salvation come. The extraordinary apathy of the French people, confirmed in the course of the trip I took to Paris, convinced me of this. In the face of the fascist Locosta surge, our group disintegrated. What after all could we do? There was no longer any choice other than between Locosta and the front. The third force would have had meaning only if it had been supported by the French left. Since the French left was playing the game of Algerian fascism, any attempt to organize liberal actions in Algiers was doomed to failure. No amount of us had any illusions as to this. And in fact, the subsequent so-called liberal movement was in large part composed of metropolitan civil servants on duty in Algeria. Our Muslim comrades were soon to join the Maquis and the communists. After the Malut case turned to clandestine action, the others performed some minor services on the spot, acting as letterboxes, providing shelter, etc. I had left Algiers for a psychiatric hospital in Belinda, which had the reputation of being the nest of the Felia. As an intern with a doctor known for his anti-colonialist views, I was soon classified, rejected by some of the adopted by others. I remained for 8 months in Belinda, wholly absorbed in my work as an intern. My solidarity with the revolution was limited to helping distribute tracts of passing around copies of El Mujahideen that I had in my possession. I had agreed to do medical work, but the opportunity to commit myself further never materialized. In the late December 1956, I had left Belinda for Paris, and the whole set of arguments accounted for this departure, or this disguised flight. Mela, a young French Algerian non-commissioned officer, a communist who dynamited an electric tower and was guillotined. Ew, that sucks. Apart from family reasons, I especially needed perspective. As I was not working for the front, I realized my uselessness. Besides, the birth of terrorism in the city revived problems of conscience which the super tense atmosphere of Algeria made impossible to resolve with a cool head. Finally, my wife, ill-founded fear of my being arrested, although arbitrary arrests were daily occurrences, was without doubt a decisive argument. In France, I thought I would find rest. I found only a bad conscience. Every day, the newspaper brought news of arrests and of firing of friends of mine. Every fresh item of news depressed me more. I felt more useless. I tried to fight to stir up reactions of protest among those around me, to make them understand. It was wasted effort. The Persians had their minds only on their... What's that again?
Parisians.
The Parisians had their minds only on their evenings out, on the plays they wanted to see, on their vacations that had to be planned 3 months ahead of time. I found myself detesting them, despising all those Frenchmen who sent their sons out to torture people in Algeria and cared about nothing but their little shops. I rejected any feelings I had about belonging to the French nation. My people were certainly not those bourgeoisie devoid of any ideal. They were the people who suffered and died every day in the debellies and in the torture chambers. These initial reaction, to be sure, became I can't say that word.
Attenuated.
I developed sound friendship with democratic fellow interns for whom these colonial wars waged by their country was a cause of deep suffering. But I felt at home only with Algerian immigrants. This stay in France turned out in the end to be very profitable. It confirmed for me what I already sensed, that I was not French, that I had never been French. Language, cultures, these are not enough to make you belong to a people. Something more is needed. Common life, common experience and memories, common aims. All this I lacked in France. My stay in France showed me that I belonged to an Algerian community, showed me that I was a stranger in France. When my draft exemption expired in May 1958, I did not hesitate long. I had already decided to join the FLN. It's a year now since I have joined the Algerian Revolution. Remembering the difficult and ambiguous contacts I had at the outset of the revolution. I had some fear that I might not be welcome. My fear was unfounded, and I was welcomed like any other Algerian. For the Algerians, I am no longer an ally. I am brother, simply a brother, like the others. That's awesome that he actually is like, no, I'm gonna go join. Nice. Appendix 2. Anybody want to say anything before I move on to Appendix 2? Any questions? All right. My name is Brazan Yavan. Yavan, yeah. After having spent my entire youth in Algeria, in Bonn, I went to France in 1948 to continue my studies there. In 1952, after my military service, I took the competitive examination for a commission in the Algerian police. I was admitted and assigned to the Secretariat Publique. It's public. I don't know the first part. I think it's Secretariat Public of Saint Arnaud, Arnaud, a large village of the Upper Constantine Plateau, some 30 kilometers from Setif, Setif. On May 6, 1953, I took over my post as a police officer. I was then 24 years old. It must be remembered that Saint Arnaud was located at the center of the region of Setif. Yeah, thank you. Where in 1945, more than 40,000 Algerians were massacred in 3 days. The Europeans for those protections I was responsible were the very ones who, 10 years before, had participated in an Arab hunt. Ugh. These men were still reminiscing about their exploits in 1953 and comparing their respective records. I had very few private dealings with these Europeans in Saint Arnaud. On the other hand, I established friendships with Algerians, and even with a number of known nationalists. My superior superintendent, Gavinia, Antonia, and Lambert Maras, of course, warned me. The most excited European civilians, whenever the occasion arose, kept reminding me the rule to keep the Arabs down. On November 1st, 1954, the revolution broke out. Very quickly, I came to realize that I belonged in the camp of those who fighting for the Algerian nation. The countless torturers that I had occasion to witness in the exercise of my duties were to strengthen my hatred of colonialism. Algerians torn apart by two military trucks driven in opposite direction, classic torturers, by water, electricity, hanging by the thumbs or the testicles. One day, my wife, who had been kept awake all night, as she had for several weeks, by the cries of the tortured, we lived above one of the torture chambers of Saint Adu. I can't say this. Unable to stand it any longer, went and violently protested to the soldiers and the CRS, responsible for these practices. She was led back to the house with two machine guns digged in her ribs. It was at this period that I was contacted by a member of the local FLN cell. To this cell I was to communicate various items of information useful for carrying on the national war of liberation. I was able to pass on word as to the hour and place of roundups, as to which Algerians were being followed, as to which cafes were suspected. I passed on the entire secret report addressed by Superintendent Gavini to the sub-prefect of Satif regarding the impending interment of Dr. Lamin Debagain, I can't say, the present Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Provisional Government of the Algerian Republic. I had occasion to give the names of Algerian informers employed by the colonialist police. These agents were obviously very dangerous, for they sometimes managed to find out a considerable number of secrets. In May 1956, Hamoun Abdullah, a veteran who ran a Moorish cafe, one of the most active secret agents, was executed in the middle of the Rue Saint Augustine. A few months later, another spy, Mustafa, was in turn grievously wounded. In June 1956, Superintendent Gavinia, exhausted by several months of torture sessions, left on sick leave. I was then put in charge of the commissariat. In the archives, I got hold of a list of names of Algerian suspects who were recommended to be executed in short order. This list was the work of my colleagues, Siphonex Jean, and the second lieutenant, oh my gosh, Verinia, Camelia. This is all French people. I made a copy of it, which I immediately passed on to the local chief. Shortly after this, I was arrested. Before this, however, I was able to communicate to the chief an inventory of weapons, supplies, ammunition, reserves, and certain posts. The political superintendent of the South Zone, the Northern and Southern Zone were separated by a national highway that divided the village into two, decided on the basis of this information to attack several farms and to destroy a number of French army outposts. Before my arrest, on the occasion of the murder of Ben Muhammad Said, a burst of machine gun bullets was fired in my direction. I was not hit. summary executions increased in numbers under the direction of Major Pench. Thus, to give an example, 50 Algerians were executed and buried in a plot belonging to the mayor of Saint Arnaud. On November 18, 1956, I was arrested by the order of General Dufour and brought before the military tribunal, which condemned me to 5 years imprisonment with a suspended sentence. It is an Algerian that I would. It is as an Algerian that I have done all these things. I do not have the impression of having betrayed France. I am an Algerian, and like an Algerian, I have fought, and I continue to fight colonialism. As a conscious Algerian citizen, I felt I must take my place side by the side of the patriots. This is what I have done. All right, now there's something out here. Bin Majou Said, a public scribe, was killed by militiamen on September 26, 1956. He was on the list of suspects to be executed by the government forces. Conclusion. Any questions before we move on? Because we're going to the conclusion. We're gonna tie this to the end. I don't know if we're gonna finish it today, but we'll try. We'll see what happens. All right, I'll keep going then. Conclusion. We tried in the preceding pages to shed light on a few aspects of the Algerian revolutions. The originality of the impatient richness of the revolution are now and forever the great victories of the Algerian people. This community in action renovated the free and of any psychological, emotional, or legal subjection. It is prepared today to assume modern and democratic responsibilities of exceptional moment. The thesis that the launching of a new society is possible only within the framework of national independence here finds its corollary. At the same time that the colonized man braces himself to reject oppression, a radical transformation takes place within him, which makes an attempt to maintain the colonial system impossible and shocking. It is this transformation that we have studied here. It is true that independence produces a spiritual and material condition for the reconversion of man. But it is also the inner mutations, the renewal of the social and family structures that impose with a rigor of a law of emergency of the nation and the growth of its sovereignty. We say firmly that Algerian men and Algerian society have stripped themselves of the mental sedimentation and of the emotional and intellectual handicaps which result from 130 years of oppression. The same colonialism that held the people in the tight meshes of the police and of the army is today wounded to the death. French colonialism in Algeria has always developed on the assumption that it would last forever. The structures built, the port facilities, the aerodromes, the prohibitions of Arab language often gave the impression that the himself hath lost himself in his prey precisely in order to make any future break, any separation impossible. Every manifestation of the French presence expressed in continuous rooting in the time in time and in the Algerian future, and could always be read as a token of an indefinite oppression. It was the size of the European settlement, the rapacity of the settlers and their racist philosophy that inquired of every French expression in Algeria. A maximum of solidity and of weight. Likewise, it was the robustness and the vehemence of the French achievements that maintained and reinforced the oppressive category of colonialism. to the history of colonization, the Algerian people today oppose the history of the national liberation. It remains to be seen whether the French government will become aware of what is still possible. We have reviewed the victorious progress of the colonized on the path of his liberation, as revealed in the number of its particular aspects. We have indicated that strictly on the level of the individual and his tremendous dynamism, a revolutionary, fundamental, irreversible, even more far-reaching has occurred. It is now time for reason to make itself heard. If the French government now hopes to revive the conditions that existed before 1954 or even before 1958, it is well that it should know that this is now impossible. If, on the other hand, it is willing to take account of the changes that have occurred in the consciousness of the Algerian man in the last 5 years, if it is willing to lend a ear to the insistent and fraternal voices that gives impetus to the revolution and that are to be heard in the struggle of a people who spared neither their blood nor their suffering for the triumph of freedom, then we say that everything is still possible. The crushing of the Algerian Revolution is its isolation, its, oh my gosh, asphyxiation, its death through exhaustion. These are bad dreams. The revolution in depth, the true one, precisely because it changes man and renews society, was reached an advanced stage. This oxygen which creates the shape of new humanity, this too is the Algerian Revolution. And that is the end, everybody. The end of the dying colonialism. Since we got some time, does anybody have anything to say about what we just read and their thoughts about what we just read? Anybody want to come up and talk about anything that they want to address? It's taking forever.
I don't know. It seemed to say exactly what it meant to say. So, especially at the end.
Yeah. Yep. Since we have some time, I'm trying to get this book open, but it's not opening up.
Where is the book? You know which category it's in?
Which one? Oh, you're talking about the one I want?
Yeah, the Black Jacobins.
I don't know. I have to look again. But for some reason, it's not allowing me to load it. I don't know why. Let's try it again.